Hi, I'm Katerina Seibert, and today's lecture is going to be on how to produce a pre-recorded radio show. And I have a background in radio broadcasting, so it's a really familiar topic for me, having worked in different radio broadcasting backgrounds, such as college, community, and also commercial. So I did a lot of this when I worked in college and community radio, especially because they don't have live DJs on the air all the time. And this is for the course Radio Production for the MSRA program. And the parts and components of a 60-minute pre-recorded radio show are going to include a playlist of 15 songs, approximately, plus or minus, and it should add up to about 55 minutes of airtime, and it will depend on how long your other components are, so you might end up deleting a few songs at the end of the project. The second component is 3 public service announcements, which are to air intermittently between the songs. And these PSAs should be either 30 seconds or 60 seconds, but not in between. So it can't be 59 seconds or 35 seconds. It has to be exact for the radio format. And for this assignment, you will be making only 1 PSA and using 2 PSAs from your peers for the finished product of your radio show. So it is an individual project with a group component in the aspect that you will be using other people's work in the final product. You will also have an intro at the beginning of your pre-recorded radio show and an outro at the end. And there will be 4 voice breaks that are going to be intermittent throughout the songs as well. So the first thing is, how do we produce a public service announcement? The first step of this first component is going to be to choose a cause to raise awareness about. So, for example, breast cancer awareness. Another example could be brain cancer awareness. It could be related to the environment. It could be related to animal adoption. There are so many different options for PSAs. And the classic PSA, the original PSA, is Smokey the Bear. So, maybe do something just a little bit creative that has to do with things that you're interested in. And the second step is going to be to write a voiceover, a VO script, and time yourself reading this out loud to ensure that it's between, your 30-second mark or your 60-second mark. You want to make sure you're on point before you start recording. And I personally recommend allowing 3 seconds of buffer room for fade ins and outs. So for a 30-second PSA, the VO should only be 24 seconds. And for a 60-second PSA, I make my VOs about 54 seconds to allow for the fade in and fade outs. And the reason is, on air, when you don't do that and you do the hard cut, sometimes it just gets cut off by other things that are on either end of it. And the third step is going to be to record your voice over, and we're going to use Pro Tools for this assignment because it's the industry standard and what we use in our program here. And the fourth step is to edit your VO for pops, clicks, and pauses. And it's very similar to what you'd be doing maybe in a podcast, but it's much shorter, so you can spend a little bit more time editing out those annoying pops and clicks. And just to show you real quick, we are going to be using a SM58 microphone, our classic, and a Shure mic. This is going to be our radio broadcasting standard microphone. And you can check them out in the recording core. And then you also want to make sure you're using a pop screen to help with those pops and clicks so that you don't have popping P's, and it'll just sound a lot better overall when you're producing your radio show. And these are just things that you'd have as a basic as a radio broadcaster in the studio or from a home studio or even for a podcast. All right, so that's the equipment you'll be using. And you are going to select an instrumental music bed and appropriately adjust the levels of the music and the voiceover. So you don't want the music to overpower the voiceover. And that's why we're doing an instrumental without having competing words. So you just want to make sure it's quiet so that it's a supportive background rather than an overpowering component, and that makes you not be able to hear the content of the public service announcement. And there will be extra credit for those of you who can use sound effects that you record yourself using a Zoom recorder to make the PSA even more dynamic. And I do that in a lot of my PSAs that I make on for the air because it just enhances the overall quality of the product and makes it more interesting for listeners. So definitely make sure to put those fade ins and fade outs in your PSA, like I discussed above, and to make sure that you're doing either an exponential or a linear fade. And you can choose which of those that you prefer. You're going to export your PSA as a 48K WAV file and name your file with the cause, kill date, and your last name. And a kill date is basically the date at which the PSA should expire from the air. So some PSAs, and I would prefer if your PSA was not seasonal per se, and it was longer lasting. So if you are to create a PSA that is for a breast cancer awareness run that's coming up next week, that's great, but it will have to have a kill date, let's say of 11/1/21, because breast cancer awareness is in the month of October, and November 1st, we would want that to expire from the radio. So put your file name, your cause, and your kill date and your last name. So my example is breast cancer PSA kill 11/1/21 Cybert. And we will do a peer review of these PSAs in a later class period, but for now we're just going to overview all of the components of this project. So the PSA script is a very important part before starting recording. And so I put an example here of one that I've done. This is my Refuse, Reduce, Reuse, Recycle PSA that I won a Colorado Broadcasters Association award for Best PSA. So it's a good example of how to create something dynamic. And we're going to listen to this now, and you can read along too.
Globally, more than 1 million plastic water bottles are sold each minute. Humans have produced more than 9 billion tons of plastic worldwide, and only 9% of our plastic waste has been recycled. It takes 450 years minimum for one plastic water bottle to degrade, breaking down into microplastics, which have been found in our rain, snow, and drinking water. A 2019 USGS study discovered microplastics in 90% of rainwater samples collected in the Rocky Mountains. Unfortunately, plastic waste is deposited into our oceans, lakes, rivers, and reservoirs. The largest trash island, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, covers 600,000 square miles. You can help minimize the amount of plastic debris in our ecosystem. Refuse single-use plastic items. Reduce the amount of waste you produce. Choose to reuse and recycle. Drop off your recycling at 195 Basin Park Drive. For more information on recycling in the Gunnison Valley, visit GunnisonCounty.org.
All right, so I hope you could hear that all right. And if you can't, I will also include the file link with the other files from this assignment. So as you can see, I did use many sound effects such as a ka-ching, rain sounds, recycling smashing of a recycling bin, ocean waves and seagulls, and a garbage truck. So these enhanced the overall texture and dynamic nature of this PSA. And if you do the same, then you would get extra credit. And definitely just check out a Zoom recorder to record those PSA sound effects. And moving on to our next component of our pre-recorded radio show, how do we produce your intro, outro, and voice breaks? So basically, a lot of what you're going to be doing is writing before you even begin to record. So you're going to write your intro script. So I wrote a little template here, and you can vary it up a little bit. It doesn't have to be exact. I would love it if you put your own creative spin on it. And here's a little example. So I am blank on blank FM, and you are listening to blank radio. This show will be featuring blank music. Our first track this evening is by blank artist. and then add a short little blurb about the artist to make the show more interesting, if you have time and space. So this assignment is a simulation radio show, not a real radio show. So we don't have a specific station ID or station name, as we don't have a radio station on our campus here at CU Denver. There is a metro station, but it's non-affiliated. So we're going to make up our own station IDs and DJ names for our shows. So here's an example of mine. I am DJ Kat on 97.4 FM, and you are listening to Lynx Radio from the campus of University of Colorado Denver. This show will be featuring jazz music. Our first song in the set list is Signal from the Noise by Bad Bad Not Good, off of the 2021 album Talk Meaning. So that's just a little example of an intro, and you notice how I did say off of the 2021 album Talk Meaning rather than saying off their most recent album Talk Meaning. And the reason I do that is so that this show that's pre-recorded won't be dated, whereas a live show is what's happening right now, and it applies to the weather outside or the news right now. Pre-recorded radio shows can be played over and over and over again, so you do not want to date them in any way. So for example, if Bad Bad Not Good came out with an album next week, then this information would no longer be correct. So you want to make sure to keep things timeless in a way. And for the outro script, here's an example of what you could do. And you want to record these each as separate segments in Pro Tools. So here's my example. Thanks for tuning in to Lynx Radio. This is DJ Kat signing off of 97.4 FM. Stay tuned for more music broadcasting from students and faculty here at the University of Colorado Denver campus. So that's just a little example, and you can put your own spin on that as well. And for your voice breaks, which you're going to have 4 of and are intermittently between, you're going to have a short description of the tracks that were played in the last segment of songs. Like, you want to just make sure that all of the artists are given credit where credit is due, which is why we have to say who the artist was and what song it was, so that people can be like, oh yeah, I know that artist and I'm going to download that song. So you want to give credit where credit is due and write these short voice breaks announcing which song is coming up next and which songs just played. And you can give a little extra info on the artists if you wish, such as just fun facts about them, and that does take up extra space. So if you do add longer voice breaks, you'll have to cut some of your tracks and have less songs. The fourth aspect of producing the intro, outro, and voice breaks is going to be to record and produce these breaks, similar to how we record podcasts and other aspects of this. So for the full script example handout, I'm going to include that as well, so you can peruse it on your own time because it's pretty lengthy. But I'll just show you real quick. So this is an example of a script that I did for a pre-recorded radio show in the past. So I have basically just different paragraph segments, and you want to break it up so it's easy to read when you're reading it. So I have my intro, voice break 1, voice break 2, voice break 3, and voice break 4, and then my outro. So that is going to be basically what your document for your script is going to look like. And it's just, you're definitely going to want to read off of that while you're recording because it's a lot to memorize. And our next component is going to be assembling and mastering your radio show. So the first step is to assemble. You assemble all the components in their correct positions in Pro Tools. So you have your intro, and then you're going to have your first track. And then after your first track, you're going to have your second track and your third track. And all of these are going to have crossfades in between them. And you're just going to lay it all out and assemble it in Pro Tools like you would with any other multi-track session. And then you're going to normalize all the individual levels of the audio tracks so that the listeners don't have to constantly be reaching for the volume controls on their radio or their other playback devices. You want them to be able to just sit back and enjoy the experience, because that's what radio's about. Radio's less about interacting it's more about just being able to have it on in the background or in your car while you're driving. People don't want to be constantly reaching for the volume knobs on their radio. So after normalizing individual levels of the audio tracks to be the same, you're going to want to master the final export to a -1 true peak and a -14 integrated loudness units full scale, more commonly known as LUFS. So using plugins such as the free Ulean loudness meter is going to be a great way to measure your overall loudness of your show. And the reason that we are doing a true peak of -1 and a overall integrated LUFS of -14 is because that is the industry standard for streaming. And this is not a live show. In a live show, you'd basically want everything to be approximately around -12. But since we have more control, we're going to do it like we would for things that would be mastered for Spotify or Apple Music or any streaming. So then you're going to place crossfades between everything and make sure that your show is exactly 60 minutes. It cannot be 61 minutes. It cannot be 54 minutes. It has to be exactly 60 minutes because things in radio cannot be plus or minus a second. It is a very precise way, or else it's just going to get faded out and cut off by the next piece of programming in the automation system. So you may have to cut some songs or fade your last song out before the very end. So one of my tricks is for my very last song in my set list, I will do something that I'm able to fade out either midway through or even maybe an instrumental track, so it's not as aggressive of a fade out, depending on how precisely your songs line up with your breaks. And then you're going to export your show as a 48K WAV file. And you're going to title your show, for example, Jazz Show _ So say the genre name, show, _ your last name. And that's how your final submission is going to look online. And our last step that you do not want to take a shortcut on and skip is listening all the way through for continuity to ensure all your levels are appropriate. Because pretty much every time I export and listen, I want to go back and adjust something, especially in an hour-long episode of a show. It's very different than a 60-second or a 30-second PSA. It's such a long piece that you have all these different components that have the possibility of going wrong. So you want to ensure that nothing's too quiet or too loud. And that's going to be the biggest challenge of this assignment, is just making sure that your levels are appropriate, nothing's peaking, and everything's all continuous and fluid. So examples of the final product are, they're an hour long. They're hour-long radio shows. So I'm going to let you peruse these as homework on your free time. So if you follow this link to my website portfolio, then you can listen to many examples of different pre-recorded radio shows that I've done in different stations. Some of them were for a community radio station in Boulder called KGNU, and some of them were for a college radio station in Gunnison, where I did my undergrad, called KWSB. So I have different pre-recorded radio shows from different environments, so they're a little bit different, and you don't have to listen to maybe the full hour, but get a good feel of what the final product of a pre-recorded radio should be. And just as a good tip, placing your pre-recorded radio show on your website portfolio is a great way to demonstrate your radio production and communication skills to future employers. And it's just really awesome to have these on your portfolio, and maybe that's not for everybody, but for me, it helped out a lot with job applications and just demonstrating my skill sets in producing both short pieces of production and both long pieces of production. You're producing pieces in here that are 30 seconds and then an overall composition that's an hour. And that shows that you have a lot of skills to mix and master and record different parts and pieces. So I hope that this is a fun, creative project, and I look forward to hearing all of your PSAs and final projects.